Hello and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk Education. I'm Molette Green. Today's episode is entitled Educating Our Young African American Men, Challenges and Triumphs. Studies have shown that by the fourth grade, many African American boys fall behind in the classroom. If you believe the statistics, most black men don't graduate from high school, which can often lead to a life in and out of the criminal justice system, unwed fatherhood, and even early death. We'll discuss these challenges and provide you with an example or two of some personal triumphs. On this edition of Let's Talk Education, we will talk about closing the achievement gap, the critical need for mentors, and the importance of social influences in a young black male's life. Before we meet our guests, here's a little more about educating our young African American males, challenges and triumphs.
We want to make sure that these young black males know that there's a support system for them, that they, one, have to be an advocate for themselves, and two, that they're expected to be great. This program is an adaptation of a program called Project Aspiration. My role has been to develop the strategy to galvanize the brothers in the areas of STEM. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math.
I would like to be the President of the United States of America. I love knowing where I came from and knowing what happened, and because if you don't know your past, you don't know your future.
My mentor was an original Tuskegee Airman. I always felt a responsibility to pass the legacy along because I know I walked in the footsteps of giants.
I basically feel that mentoring should be a part of the black community. I think everyone should either mentor or should be mentored.
When you express a sincere interest in a child's life, it plants a seed that gives them confidence.
Now let's meet our panel. Dr. Wade Boykin is a professor and director of the graduate program in the Department of Psychology at Howard University. He's also executive director of the Capstone Institute at the university. He has done extensive research into educational systems and their impact on today's society. Dr. Boykin has co-authored a new book on this topic entitled Creating the Opportunity to Learn, Moving from Research to Practice to Close the Achievement Gap. Also with us, Jason Frone, a prime example of how a young man faced with a multitude of challenges can channel his efforts into personal triumphs. Jason is a native of the Bronx, grew up without a father, and later became a father at the age of 15. Even with these challenges, he went on to get his college degree from Howard University and now runs his own branded promotional products company, Life Infinite. Jason is a member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity and recently helped put together Omega Psi Phi's Project Aspirations mentoring program, which was held specifically for young men ages 13 to 18. Our next guest, Dr. Anthony Hill, is an assistant clinical professor in the School of Social Service at the Catholic University of America. He's a licensed social worker in the District of Columbia, and Dr. Hill has researched adolescent risk and protective factors, as well as social work community practice. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us on this edition of Let's Talk Education. As we talk about this topic, we're losing our boys. There's a shift that's happening in the schools. By fourth grade, what's happening?
Well, what we know from the research literature and from educational practice broadly considered is that a real shift takes place in the curriculum in our nation's schools between the third and the fourth grade. Up to the third grade, students have to learn to read. They have to know phonics. They have to be able to read with fluency. But after the third grade, now they have to read to learn. They have to use their reading skills to be able to master the content of the curriculum across various subjects. If they have not learned to read by the third grade, then they are going to be at a disadvantage moving into the fourth grade and beyond. And so this certainly is a problematic that has to be addressed, particularly for black students, and especially in that regard for black boys. There's research out there that shows, for example, that at least from the standpoint of teacher perceptions, black boys, more so than any other demographic group, tend to exhibit more behavioral conduct problems, tend to show more inattention, and even to show a certain amount of defiance displays, again, relative to other demographic groups.
Now, you call that teacher perceptions. Could that
Yes.
be biases that we're also talking about here?
Well, it's an interesting question that you raised, because there's also work that shows that the threshold for what passes for behavioral misconduct is a little lower for the teachers of black boys than it is for black boys' parents. So, to what extent is it actual misconduct or just the perception that is seen by teachers who may not understand the experiences out of which that child has come? So I just am guarded to say the perception as opposed to whether it actually is the case, if you will.
Okay, well, so that's what's going on in the classroom, a little bit about what's going on in the classroom. But Dr. Hill, there are also factors in play outside the classroom that relate or interconnected. Talk a little bit, what's happening?
Absolutely. When we think about the classroom and the school in general, it's really part of a larger community. And in order to begin to address the issue of underachievement for African American boys, we need to realize that we have to connect those systems. And one of the alarming things that has been happening over the last several years is that those individual school social workers have been losing their jobs. Since the early 1900s, school social workers were integral in terms of connecting homes, communities, and pupils. And without that position in place, we see that support for collaboration within the community shrinking. And without that whole community working to help that young man achieve, it's even that much more difficult in the classroom.
Are there social workers working in the schools?
Of course, since the early 1900s, we've always had social. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
We're losing them, but
Yeah,
they're
we're losing
still there.
them because of budget cuts.
Okay.
Music education
Yes.
and social workers are usually the first items cut when budgets are cut.
And in fact, that is one of the more important, I don't know what they call specialties, but it's an integral part of making sure the child is achieving in the classroom.
Absolutely, absolutely. The school social worker works with the child, individualized, using data-driven interventions to help meet the unique needs of the individual child.
Right. Because the child may have some special issues going on at home,
Absolutely.
and that can be brought into the classroom in terms of giving this child what he or she needs specifically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Jasan, I want to bring you in here because I know that you are doing your part in the community to be a good mentor. But before we get to that part, talk about your experience growing up without a father, a male figure in the household to help you through life.
Well, I didn't realize that it was an issue probably until high school, I guess. You know, my mother provided all of my needs. I had other friends that had similar one-parent home structures that they were experiencing. And so it wasn't until I became a father, I think, that I realized the dynamic of not having my own father in the home. And because of it, it made me want to truly be there for my daughter. And so the impact that it had on me was one that maybe my father could have gave me some insight about having protected sex, about the risk of unprotected sex, and
the responsibility of becoming now a father and leading this individual into, you know, every stage of life, right?
Exactly, and it wasn't the ideal situation because I was so young, of course.
Yeah.
And so my situation was one where my daughter was adopted by her great aunt and uncle. And initially there wasn't a window of opportunity for me to be involved, so it gave me more drive to be involved and to make something of myself, which ironically at the same time I visited Howard University as a sophomore in high school and decided to pursue my future endeavors here.
You're one of the success stories that people don't want to talk about, or we don't hear enough about, because having that absent father and having become a father could have gone in a whole different direction.
Absolutely.
It really could have, and that's what you're seeing when you see these young boys that you mentor.
Correct, and sometimes it's a some young guys think that it's cool. You know, in high school I knew guys who had multiple children, and
that was their definition of manhood? Probably
so. You know, along with the having nice rims on the car, and a nice chain, and the ability to kind of puff your chest out and say I had a child with so and so's. So it's a calling for value, I think, that a lot of young black males may not have, and so they seek value in other areas that could be detrimental to their lives and also to the lives of their children.
Did you see education as a valuable way out before you became a father?
Oh, absolutely. I excelled in school. And it got a little more difficult when I got more interested in girls.
Doesn't it always?
When you're not concerned about how you look or how you're perceived,
yeah.
Education came easy for me. My mother, although she had a 8th grade education, she made sure that my homework assignments were done on time, that she went to parent-teacher association meetings. Her interest in me made me interested in my own self. And so I think along with today's society where there's so many distractions, I think the biggest part with young black males is their value system. They want education doesn't seem as valuable to them as a tattoo or hanging out or just making some quick money. And so I think
that's what we have to do, because that brings me back to Dr. Boykin and to you too, Dr. Hill, because if you look at the stats, 1 in 3 African American males who enters kindergarten will not go to college. And so there are many examples of Jason. These men are intelligent. It's not that they're not intelligent, but we're losing it in some way. And how can we start with the achievement gap part of it? How can we start to turn things around?
Well, with regard to the achievement gap, it is a very complex phenomenon that I think in many respects we have underappreciated the complexity of it. And we've looked for magic bullets on how to close this achievement gap between black students on the one hand and their white counterparts on the other. And we've also looked for simplistic solutions when the problem really is, a lot more substantial. And so, first of all, we have to get away from these single dimension solutions. Nowadays, people are saying, oh, it's teacher quality. You got to have high teacher quality in the classroom. And not too long ago, it was, oh, it's parent involvement. Or no, you got to have remediation in place. Well, the answer is that we have to be broad in our scope. The answer is really all of the above. We have to have all of the different sectors that impact upon the schooling of our children working in concert and working in ways that the evidence shows will make them effective in helping children to succeed in school. So we have to have parent involvement. We have to have after-school enrichment and acceleration programs. We have to have programs that help students who may not have gotten the kind of services they deserve to have as they go along. Just one small example. We recently worked with a middle school in Washington, D.C. So these are 7th and 8th graders. And just by a whim, we chose to take along with us some interns from Howard's Medical School to give these students eye examinations. Now these are 7th and 8th graders, and we found that almost 1/4 of all the students in that school needed corrective lenses. Obviously,
and a simple thing like
a
that
simple thing
can
like that.
really take a child's education to new heights when you can see,
yes,
when you can focus.
Obviously, you can't read well if you can't see well, and so how long has this been going on? So access to these kind of services is very important. It's also important to make sure that there is teaching quality. People say teacher, but really it's teaching quality, because what has to happen in the classroom is to get these kids truly engaged in the learning process.
Make it relatable. Make the
relatable.
lesson plan relatable.
Right, and so professional
You talk about that in your
development.
book too.
Yes. So ongoing, continuous improvement-oriented professional development is really what our teachers need to deliver high-quality instruction, in the classroom. Now, what happens when this particular set of dynamics aren't in place to the extent that they need to be? Well, it turns out that the issue of engagement versus disengagement is extremely important.
Yeah.
We want to see students engaged. When they are engaged, when they are learning inside the classroom, then that is going to lead to higher achievement outcomes that close the achievement gap. But when students are disengaged in terms of the task, in terms of the learning processes, then that helps them, that sort of prompts them to become even more disengaged, across time. And as students, particularly black boys, are disengaged inside the classroom, as they get older, they become disengaged from school, broadly speaking.
Altogether, yeah.
And then even at even older ages, into even young adulthood, when they've now dropped out, if not literally, they've dropped out, in terms of their ideology about education.
Jason, talk about the 13 to 18-year-olds that you guys had a chance to work with in Project Aspirations. What was the goal there?
The goal was to expose them to careers in STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and for them to see black men that could be their father, cousins, uncles, someone that they can relate to, who have excelled.
Because there are black NASA engineers.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Absolutely.
They're out there, but they need to see them.
Yes, yes indeed. We had scientists, pilots, physicists, bio engineers, and so what they got was an exposure to a variety of careers and some insight on mentoring and manhood and
what do they say about manhood? I mean, what are they saying? What are the young people thinking?
Well, sometimes they equate it to material things. And
like what you said when you were younger.
Right. You think it's being able to have a lot of money, be able to have a nice car. Some think it's, being able to have a lot of women. But others think that it's, because there are a lot of young black males who got it, who understand that manhood is about being responsible, being accountable, being able to know when you need help and asking for help. And so we were really surprised by the perspective of these young black males. And
did you see the change, or a little twinkle in their eyes when they saw these professionals who looked just like them?
Absolutely. I mean, most of them were encouraged to continue their future aspirations, and some of them have, stated that they wanted to be an engineer or wanted to work for NASA. And it's really about exposure, and one thing that the facilitators and the other brothers who attended the conference did when they engaged with them was to share something about their youth. And that's
making it relatable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Dr. Hill, very important though, because as Dr. Boykin mentioned, it's not one thing that we need to do. It's multifaceted, but a lot of the recent studies are talking about the impact of mentors and how that really is key to turning these young men's lives around.
Right. One of in my research, one of the key factors to positive youth behavior is a role model, having a role model. And that is why the community needs to be involved. There needs to be a connection between the community and the classroom. And my experience is not much different than my colleagues on the panel. And one of the things that really made a big difference in my personal life is being connected with the Howard University Upward Bound program when I was in high school. And that's a great example, plug to Upward Bound programs over the country. What Upward Bound did for me was to expose me to mentors that looked like me and to help me understand the importance of education. That I wouldn't have gotten that necessarily in the classroom. I would have gotten, or I did get in the classroom, it's important to learn, it's important to study, but I couldn't translate that importance to reality. Being a part of the Upward Bound program or other programs like that, I think students, like I did, receive opportunities to hear from people that had some of the same struggles that they're going through. And it's almost like, well, if he could make it, I certainly can make it. And it really is important to have those connections.
Is there real research, Dr. Boykin, that shows that these young males perform better in school if the material in the classroom is relatable, even culturally relatable?
Absolutely. There is solid research that shows that when you put in place what we call meaningful learning, that is, you center what children are learning in school to some degree more proactively in their lived experiences, that will get them more engaged. And engagement itself is really an intriguing process because it is also multidimensional. It's not just, are you just on task? It is, are you on task in a progressive way leading toward higher learning outcomes? But it's also emotional engagement. You know, you might be on task doing the work, but do you have a positive feeling? Are you enjoying the experience? And then there's cognitive engagement. That is the extent to which you own that learning process and you dig deeply into the material. And all three of those aspects of engagement, the behavioral, the affective, and the cognitive engagement, are all impacted positively when the material is that which the students can identify with. And that's particularly true for African American boys.
Is there a choice between that young men are dealing with between their racial identity and their desire to learn?
I think that's an interesting question. And I would say no. I think that it's how one conceptualizes what it means to get an education, which is independent of one's racial identity. I think it has to do more with the peer group and the influence of the peer group. I think, and studies have shown that black boys can understand the importance of education, but translating that understanding of the importance to education to actually achieving, that's where there's a gap. And some of the things that we are talking about here will help close that gap, so they can turn that understanding that we need an education into, to operationalize it, to actually get that education.
What do you say, Jason?
I think it's important that you have exposure to a quality education, and that education should have some racial, historical content that you can affix your value system to. If we just go from the time we were born on forward, we won't really understand the struggle that is important to respect in order to get a grip on what society has to offer you, because you can get a good education and excel to acquire a good job, a career, or own your own business, but you can still feel unfulfilled because you are ideally living in a world where other people know their culture, know their history, and therefore you may
great point.
Feel inadequate.
Knowing your culture, knowing your history, because we are still dealing with this way of thinking among some of our men and some of our young women, but some of our men that if you're smart, if you're getting the good grades, if you're articulate, if you have a command of the English language, then you're acting white. So we still have to battle that in some communities, Dr. Hill,
Absolutely.
Dr. Boykin. I mean, this is still very real as a problem.
Right. Well, yeah, and from my own experience, I was called, that person, because, I wanted to study and to be smart. But again, I agree. It is important to understand historically where the African American race has come and where we can go. But it is important in who you align yourself with. I chose to align myself with people who studied and wanted to do well in school. And so those outside forces that called me wannabe and all those negative names, I minimized that because I aligned myself with like-minded people, and I had mentors that worked with me to help me understand that I'm on the right path.
Give us some homework. What can we do to actually see more success stories? I know we need more men to step up. What do you want to see happen?
I think that by making it a national issue, and then making,
because this is a crisis.
Oh, it is. It's indeed a crisis, and if we want to look as an organization, Omega Psi Phi, into our bicentennial, we definitely have to invest in young black males, which we are doing. But it's the next steps, I think, are for black males of all ages to, one, realize they have something valuable to offer. Young black males should understand that they have to be their own best friend, their own advocate. We need those mentors
to step up there, because they have to show them their value sometimes.
And mentors have to, those who want to mentor have to understand that it's a skill set.
It is a skill set.
In order to mentor.
That's right. Final thoughts. What do we need to do?
Well, certainly one of the concerns that needs to be addressed is the mindset that all too many educators bring with them into the classroom when they see this room full of black students, in this case particularly black boys, and they often see our children in terms of what they don't know, what they can't do, what they don't get at home, in terms of deficits, in terms of deficiencies, in terms of pathologies. And what we advocate, and the research backs this up, is begin to sort of turn that script around and look for the assets, intellectual assets, cultural assets, experiential assets, social assets that students can bring with them into the classroom that you can capitalize upon. And we do that more so, we're going to get better results.
And one quick thing?
I would say to members of the community to mobilize your social capital to come together to work to close this achievement gap.
There's power in numbers. And
Absolutely.
What would the world be like if they had given up on you?
Well, I wasn't going to give up on myself, so.
You were a special one indeed, and still are. Much success to you in your ventures and being a mentor to these young men who need our help. And thank you all, gentlemen. This has been a very informative and productive conversation. Thank you for giving us your insight on this topic. And we thank you for joining us, as this has been another excellent discussion, educating our young African American men, challenges and triumphs. Our thanks once again to Dr. Boykin, Jason Frone, and Dr. Anthony Hill for their insight. And that's it for this edition of Let's Talk Education. I'm Molette Green. We'll see you next time.